Washington Journal continues.
On your screen is Representative Cliff Stearns, Republican of Florida, also ranking member of Consumer Protection Subcommittee in the House. Want to get your reaction. Your committee is going to be holding a hearing later today on the issue of lead in toys. Want to get your reaction to the money section of U.S. Today. Lead in Mattel toys was 180 times the limit. CEO plans to testify in Capitol hearing today.
Yes. The CEO, Robert Eckert, is going to testify. I'm the ranking member on the on the Commerce, Consumer Protection and Trade, and we have jurisdiction over the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And we're having the chairwoman, Nancy Nord, speak to us about just that article that you mentioned.
And what are they going to tell you? What did you find out? You sent letters to...
We sent out 20 letters to toy manufacturers around the United States, because it turns out a lot of the toys that were imported from China had three problems. In many cases, there was lead paint that was used and did not meet our standard in the United States of 600 parts per million. The second problem was there was lead in these small little magnets that you see on toys that are used, and these small round magnets fall off, and some of the children sometimes swallow them. In fact, one child died this year because of it. And the third thing is that a lot of the jewelry that particularly came from China had lead in it, and this jewelry could either be swallowed or continued used on the surface of a child could affect it.
Was Mattel the only company that responded saying yes, they had found lead in their toys?
No. We sent these letters to 20 different manufacturers of toys, and they all responded. It's all on the website of the Commerce, Consumer Protection and Trade Subcommittee. And so the American people can go look at those particular responses that these 20 companies gave us.
Well, we'll get an answer to why this happened in the first place, but here are the phone numbers. Democrats 202-737-0002, Republicans 202-737-0001, Independents 202-628-0205. How was lead able to this amount, get into toys that are imported into the United States?
Well, there was a recent summit last week between China and the United States dealing particularly with this. When talking to the CEO of Mattel, who has the largest number of toys, they have been very, I think, energetic and responsible in going out to the southern part of China, where a lot of these manufacturers exist, and putting in place safeguards for the future. But the Chinese government does not monitor this as carefully as the United States government does. And secondly, perhaps to save money, they use this lead paint when they shouldn't. In many cases, it might have been inadvertent because they don't have the reliability and quality assurance program that we have. And so in the end, we had, there's 16.7 million toys were recalled, 48 recalls by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Of that, 3.8 million were dealing with lead paint, and there was over 9 million that dealt with these magnetic magnets that had lead in them, and lastly the remaining were dealing with just general safety.
And you brought some toys with you today.
I brought some toys to show you, Greta.
These are examples of? These
are examples. Now, I think it's important that the American people realize, because there's been a lot of publicity on this, and some of it is very valid, but the risk is not as prevalent as perhaps the articles would indicate. If I can show you here, we have a little plate of a hot dog on it, and just the yellow part is the part that has some lead paint in it. In the Jeep there, we have just the top of the Jeep has some lead paint in it. It's not the entire Jeep, just the top. And in this little small sort of fire engine we have here, it's only the portion that's yellow. So the lights on the top and the ladders on the side, in those two areas you can see the yellow portion that has lead paint in it. So you could see that it's a very small portion of the entire toy, and this is how it goes. But again, it's not within the standard of the United States government, and it has been recalled.
Is it a dangerous amount, even though it's a small portion of these toys?
I think anything above 600 parts per million is dangerous, and that's the way we're taking the position, is that they have to be recalled, and all these toy manufacturers agreed to do it. It's a huge expense for them, but it's important, and I think our committee has made taken the initiative and said to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, you've got to do a better job. And secondly, the toy manufacturers have to have in place, particularly in southern China, the quality assurance people to take care and inspect.
What legislative proposals are out there?
Well, the Consumer Product Safety Commissioner, chairwoman, has a legislative proposal of herself that she's going to provide today. Also, our committee expects to have one also. We're going to have perhaps difference of opinion between Republicans and Democrats, but I think we both agree that we need a higher standard in terms of inspection, particularly for imports. It's going to be very difficult with China. China is our second leading importer of products next to Canada. You know, millions of products are coming in from China, and we don't have the ability to check them all. But we can get to the source, which is we can identify those areas in China which are particularly egregious and put inspectors there and penalties in the event that the Chinese manufacturer does not comply with the standards we have.
First phone call from Representative Cliff Stearns comes from Jacksonville, Florida, Republican line.
Thank you. Congressman Stearns is my representative, and I hope the people listening out there know he did not vote for NAFTA. He did not start this free trade thing. He has posted all of his earmarks on his webpage for ages. He is strong on the border. He is a believable man. He is also not an attorney. He was an electrical engineer. He sends around surveys to see what parts of the economy we think should be stressed. In a day when I don't really trust or believe in many Congress people or senators, everyone should have a rep like Congressman Stearns, and I thank him from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for taking my call.
Phone call from one of your fans, Cliff.
Thank you. It could have been my mother. Well, that was a nice to start off with. That was an easy question.
You talked about penalties. What sort of penalties could we see?
Well, obviously in China the penalties are a little more stiffer than the United States, and we expect that they will incarcerate individuals that continue to put lead in the paint. The lead, in effect, Greta, creates a more shiny. If you look at the toys we got there, if you can see the yellow that's in the hot dog and the yellow that's on the lights and the ladders, that yellow is much shinier than perhaps the red, and so it appeals to consumers, particularly children. So there's sort of an advantage for putting the lead in, but at the same time, there are substitutes that are safe, and secondly, it's harmful to the child itself.
Should we have independent labs that are separate from the federal government inspecting these toys?
Well, we do. We do have some independence. The Consumer Product Safety Commission can go out, subcontract, and have an independent lab do that. But the sheer volume that's coming from China is such that it's going to be difficult to inspect everything. But I think you can go to the sources and put the inspectors there. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has a very tough job. They have 15,000 separate types of units that they have to inspect. And as I pointed out, they had 48 recalls this year, which included not only the lead paint and the magnets, but others. And in, I think, 2000, under the Clinton administration, they had 130 recalls on about 60 million items. So the question is, do we need to have the Consumer Product Safety Commission have more employees? I think they roughly have just under 500 employees today. Their budget is about $63 million, and I suspect it'll be increased and they'll have more employees. But the long and short of it, with 15,000 units they have to monitor. That's a classification like toys. And in this case, there were 16.7 million toys itself. It's an arduous task.
North Adams, Massachusetts, Democrats line. Good morning.
Good morning. I have my own theory about this, considering that George Bush's father was ambassador to China, that he and Dick are probably getting a cut of this. But nevertheless, if they're going to try to send us all this junk, shouldn't we just not take it? Secondly, to the lady, the moderator here, I noticed someone called before and mentioned that you were a little quick on the draw with some people. I do realize you have a time restriction. But might I suggest that 1 or 2 or 3 days a month you may dedicate several hours to just family and relatives of people serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, and let's give them enough time to voice their point of view, because they've earned it. Thank you.
Thanks for the suggestion.
Well, I sort of agree with him. I have voted continually against most favored nation status for China. I think it should have been done sector by sector and not a broad brush like we did to give all the products this most favored nation status. Also, I've had a hearing with the Ways and Means Committee when I was chairman of my subcommittee dealing with the currency manipulation in China. I think the United States is being quite irresponsible by not limiting some of these imports because of the dangers, not just in the lead and the poisoning, the lead in the paint, but also our food safety is what I'm concerned about even more, because that's more egregious. So I agree with the caller in the sense that if I had my druthers, I'd rather have a sector-by-sector investigation and import only in those areas that I feel are safe.
Elizabeth, Arkansas, Republican line.
Good morning, Representative Cliff Stearns.
Yes.
Sir, I'm glad you're on there, and I appreciate your service. And I bought a. My question involves a Tonka dump truck from Hasbro, but it's made in China.
Right. Yeah.
It's yellow and red. It's a huge dump truck, and I'm wanting to give it to my 3-year-old grandson. I have no idea how much lead's in it, and there's no one to contact.
Well, I tell you, I don't know if that Tonka dump truck toy has lead in the paint, but I'll just tell you that I can find that out for you, and if you'll give me your phone number, I'll have my staff call.
We unfortunately lost the phone line, but perhaps the caller can email you.
Right. Well, you can call my office, congressional office here in Washington. It's 202-225-5744. But what I see that some of these items do have lead in them. It's particularly in those items that are very bright and shiny, as you can see in the truck that we showed you. Perhaps a yellow paint is the one that I found that's there particularly. So I think it's worthwhile for you just to have somebody check it. Obviously, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, you can call them and they'll tell you if it's on the list.
Is there a website, the Consumer Product Safety Commission?
There
they have
is
a website that
they do have a website.
And they can check specific toys for consumers?
They could tell you what particular toys that they recalled and give that safety to the consumers. In fact, when I see Nancy Nord, who's the chairwoman, I'm going to ask her to explain how consumers can go out and find out whether the toys they have in their homes do have some concern.
Will this whole issue be resolved by Christmas time, the holidays, when people are buying toys for children?
Well, that's a question we talked to Mattel, and they have the biggest stake, and they said it absolutely will be solved by then. And they're making, I think, a very positive and also aggressive move to not only recall, but to make sure that the manufacturers in China are indeed complying with American standards.
Colden, New York, independent line. Your next phone call. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like to compliment on the moderator. You're doing an absolutely beautiful job.
Thank you.
And secondly, I'd like to point out that when I was young, they gave me 150 set soldiers, all solid lead. I played with them. My children played with them. My grandchildren played with them. What the heck is going on? I don't see any problem with lead. I think this whole thing is sort of a made-up thing to enhance lawyers. Thank you very much.
What has been the impact of lead in toys?
Well, the standard that was created at 600 parts per million has been established scientifically to show that it could harm children. Now, children's resistance are much different than an adult. But the gentleman's point is also being made that we have lead in our homes. We have lead in the dirt. So if a child walks outside and plays in the dirt, there could be lead in there. So lead is omnipresent everywhere, and that lead in toys alone is not the chief and only concern. There's lead elsewhere, and that's why a lot of people that have older homes should be concerned. But there is scientific evidence that shows that lead is harmful to human beings, and that we should try to prevent it.
What is the impact of lead on children? What sort of symptoms?
Well, it depends upon how much you get. I'm not a doctor, and I don't know entirely, but the obvious case where a child swallowed a magnet, and this magnet had lead in it, caused the swelling of the intestine and a high fever, and eventually he died.
Next phone call, Pittsburgh, Republican line.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I tell you, my thoughts on the subject are that we have a law 600 parts per million, and we have manufacturers who are responsible for that. And, the responsibility, I don't think, is on the Chinese, but on the companies that get parts there. I guess I think that if the laws and this were put in contracts with the Chinese, maybe the cost gets high enough that we decide to make those here and create reasonable jobs for people in this country rather than relying on somebody else to do it. The other thing is, I think that there ought to be civil penalties or maybe even criminal penalties for those that do not pass the United States' laws onto the Chinese when they're contracting to do this.
Well, I think your first point is interesting in the fact that if the United States toy manufacturers, decide to go to China or anywhere in the Pacific Rim because labor is so much cheaper, they have a responsibility to provide protection for the American citizen. And if in fact the Chinese or any country, whether it's Thailand or anywhere in the Pacific Rim, does not comply, there has to be responsibility put on the toy manufacturers because they did not send their representatives there. They did not check quality assurance. There's no kinds of standards in many of these countries, and that's perhaps one of the reasons I was against the most favored nation status for China in trading. Your second point is that civil penalties. I think there are civil penalties, and in many cases litigation in this will be immense if a child or a person is affected deleteriously because of these toys.
Any indication, any talk of Mattel and other toy companies taking their companies out of China and moving it to other countries that are not using lead?
Well,
or the United States?
Well, the CEO of Mattel was in to see me yesterday, and that was one question. Are you going to another country? And he indicated at this point they think it's less expensive, more efficient for them to go into those manufacturers. They know where they are. They almost can pinpoint them right down in a certain valley, in a certain area of China. So they think going in there and putting in the necessary standards will solve the problem rather than going out and establishing a new plant and a new relationship with another country.
Is China open to that, the government? Open to a U.S. company coming in and telling...
They've indicated in the summit that the Mattel and other companies can send in their representatives to check the toys, and I think that China has probably taken notice that this is an immense problem in terms of imports and is a lot of money for them in terms of their trade with the United States. So I'm sure they're going to try hard. I don't think they're going to try as hard as I would like them to see, but I've been involved with intellectual property rights dealing with China, and they haven't abided by the intellectual property rights that we have. I've had hearings on that. In fact, you can go outside the American embassy in Beijing and you can buy DVDs of movies right down the street. They're laid out right on the main boulevard. So I think it's going to be a constant battle.
On the Democrats' line, Gentilly, Louisiana. Go ahead. You're on the air with Representative Stearns.
When this administration came in, they came in on the premise of less regulation on large major corporations, and I think what's happening now is it's coming back to bite them in the butt. But I'd also like to know, what kind of credentials does this woman have that's running the Consumer Product Safety Commission? Is she just another crony that supported the Republican Party that came in that knows absolutely nothing, as in so many departments, that her job was just for her support before the election? Thank you.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think before I came to Congress, I was a small businessman, and I have the same sense that the people in Washington in these bureaucracies should have the experience, and it should not just be given out to somebody who, through political patronage. I think that's wrong. Some of these critical bureaucracies are important to have proficient and educated people years in that particular job. In this case, Nancy Nord is an attorney. She has been working in Washington most of her life. She has not been at the Consumer Product Safety Commission recently, but she was working there in previous administrations, Republican administrations. She's had some prior experience, which I think is helpful for us. But I think your point is well made.
She's the acting chairwoman of the commission.
Right.
Does the Senate have to confirm her?
The Senate has to confirm her.
Is that in jeopardy over this situation?
Well, I don't think it is. I don't think it is, but I'm not a senator, I'm a congressman.
Middleborough, Massachusetts, Republican line.
Hi, how are you? I'm wondering if Mattel or Hasbro issues a set of specifications with the toys that they design.
They do. They have a set of specifications. Obviously, they're embarrassed that some of these got through without the inspection of their people, as well as the trust that they had in these Chinese plants. But they have taken a proactive stance, and I think they're going to definitely, I think, they'll have it under control.
How many inspectors does the Commission, Product Safety Commission, have in China inspecting these toys?
I don't know if they have any. I think they're relying upon the toy manufacturers to do it, and they do statistical probability analysis of these products here in the United States. As I say, they have less than, they have about a little under 500 employees.
Modesto, California, independent line.
Hello. My question for you is, you know, I watch a lot of news, and I'm noticing that it's just not toys. It's, you know, we've had issues with foods, we've had issues with toothpaste, things like that. And, you know, I'm not really big into conspiracy theories and say, oh, you know, they're doing this on purpose or anything like that. But at the same time, you know, I also heard you mention them saving a buck. But, you know, with them knowing that we're one of their biggest importing countries, what do you think would possess the Chinese to even let these products leave their ports and come here? Basically, that's my question for you.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by the conspiracy theory, but China, as you know, is 1.3 billion people. We are roughly 300 million. And the country that size does not have the full industrialization and inspection team that we have in a normal kind of protection of your food, your toothpaste, or in this case, toys. So what we see, and I've been in China and have seen it, there is many cases there is no supervision at all, and everybody can start this company after the communist government approves it, and they can start manufacturing. So I just think you have a country that's moving more towards industrialization, but is still not there yet with its full protection of safety in foods and other items.
How should the U.S. government negotiate with China over this issue and other issues to prevent similar situations down the road with other products?
Well, to anticipate this is going to be difficult, but I think the summit we just recently had talking about toys shows that they have now put in place the ban of all lead in paint. So anybody that does not obey that, there'll be a draconian punishment to people in China who don't. So I think China has understood that it's important, or will ban all their toys, and that is not what they want.
Amelia, Virginia, Republican line.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a concern for the parents. I'm a mother of 4, and all my children are 10 and under, and there's just a mountain of toys to go through to find which ones may or may not be safe. I did so, and I came across some Dora the Explorer toys, which I thought were questionable. So I gathered them up and took them down to Walmart, and I said, I want to know if these toys are safe, and if they're not, I'd like a refund. And they said, well, we can't help you. We don't know if these toys are safe or not, and you don't have a receipt. So what are parents supposed to do? What are some things that we can do to arm ourselves with as much knowledge as we can get so that our children will be safe?
I think that's the best question I've had this morning, because it's a devil of a problem, because having raised 3 boys, I still have left over. They're almost out of the house, but I still have just a closet full of toys that eventually we're going to throw out. But what do you do, and what is the safety involved? I'm just telling you as a parent, I think that it's probably not as dire as perhaps you would think reading the newspapers. As I say, if you're in an older home, or perhaps your children are playing outside in the dirt, there's a possibility of lead exposure too. The long and short of it is, I just think you just have to go to the Consumer Product Safety Commission website, call them and ask them, and they probably have a list. I'm pretty sure they have a list, and I'll make sure if they don't, after the hearing today, that they have a list. And the rest of the toys that are not on that list, I think, are safe.
What time is your hearing today?
10 a.m. this morning. And it'll probably be broadcast, I hope, by C-SPAN.
You can check cspan.org for the schedule. Potomac Falls, Virginia, Democrats line. You're next.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Please allow me some time. I'm a grandmother of 10, and they're all under the age of 12. I would like the congressman to ask Mattel, the head of Mattel, the first question out of his mouth should be, Mattel, what is your bottom line? What are the profits that you have been making ever since you moved the plants from the United States to China? And the same thing for Hasbro and Fisher-Price. Fisher-Price is one of the largest manufacturers of toys for babies. And what is their bottom line? And as I recall, the woman from the Consumer Protection Commission, she didn't even know how many recalls had been made. So I don't think she's qualified even to judge a pie-eating contest.
Do you know the answers to those questions already?
Well, I sort of asked indirectly that question to Robert Eckert, who is the CEO of Mattel. And I said, is this just something based upon bottom line? He said, no. When you think about it, we comply in the United States, Mattel does, and a large portion of their manufacturing of the toys is still in the United States, but there is a segment that's overseas, particularly in China. And he said it wasn't a question of trying to make more money. It was a question of not inspecting the manufacturers of these toys in China, and China inadvertently or intentionally to save money. In China, the people who are selling their goods to Mattel and manufacturing them were actually trying to save money there. So the way he explained it is it wasn't Mattel, it was the people who they were buying the manufactured goods from.
And how much could this controversy hurt Mattel?
Well, I think it's a case of it could hurt them, but I don't think it will, because I think of their aggressive position right now and guaranteeing that all the toys are recalled. And if the toys are not, and the people don't know about it, they'll know about it after this hearing or going to the website of the Consumer Product Safety Commission.
Orlando, Florida, Republican line. Your last phone call.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I have a comment about, they were first, before I ask my question, they were saying that they wanted somebody that's experienced in this organization that checks on the toys, but they don't want, Democrats and other people don't want oil people to be in charge when it comes to energy. They want somebody that's in a research mode for producing new other stuff. That doesn't make sense to me. But 2 weekends ago, Dr. Gouda on CNN has a medical thing, and he was discussing this, and he laid out a pencil shavings of how much children would have to eat of this, and it would look like about a 6 to 9 inch circle. He also said that before America, that took 200 years to figure out the lead-based paint, it was a 30% content. And he said that the China one is only a 2% content. And I think Mattel should be commended for finding this on their own instead of having to rely on government, which we know government never really works good when it comes to protecting people.
Congressman?
Well, I think he has a very good point. This was found by Mattel and a lot of these toy manufacturers. The recalls came from the Consumer Product Safety Commission after they were notified. So in a way, the system was working, and I think that's commendable to our private enterprise that is working. His other point, I think, is good too, because the amount of lead that you need to be seriously injured or perhaps death is more than 600 parts per million. And in fact, only one child has died because of this, and that's because that child swallowed these magnets that have the lead in them. So I think that if we look in prospectively, this is a serious problem, but I don't think it's at the point it's epidemic, and that families out there should be overly concerned, but just cautious.
Representative Cliff Stearns, Republican of Florida, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Greta.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back,